Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started since we have 2 p.m. Eastern on the Eastern side. So my name is Matt Pickering. I'm the Endorsement and Maintenance Task Lead, or what we call E&M Task Lead here at Battelle. So endorsement and maintenance is one task or one aspect of work under the larger consensus-based entity contract, which you'll learn a little bit more about. But for the purposes of the meeting today is really an orientation or informational webinar for our standing committee members that we've recently seated for the fall 2023 and spring 2024 cycles. And so all of those on the call today that are those committee members, we thank you very much for submitting a nomination to be involved in this work. Even though if you've never been involved with this before, it's very exciting to see new perspectives, new members seated to these committees. And also your interest in learning more about this work today as we continue on to launch the fall 2023 cycle, and heading into next year, we'll actually convene the committees to render endorsement decisions on those measures, all of which you'll hear more about during the session today. I will say that the meeting is being recorded, so you won't be able to actually speak up and ask questions verbally. Rather, we kindly ask that you use the Q&A feature at the very bottom of this Zoom platform. So if you hover down below towards the bottom of the Zoom platform, if you're using the desktop device, there should be a Q&A that sort of pops up, a little Q&A. There you go. Looks like somebody's already submitted something. That's where you can submit your questions, and then we will have an opportunity at the very end of the call to answer those questions as you've submitted them at the end of our call today. So please go ahead and feel free to use that. If you're using the mobile device, there should be a Q&A feature at the bottom of that screen as well that you can also enter in your questions and submit those. But we'll get started. So thank you all again for joining. We'll go to the next slide. I'd also like to introduce my fellow colleagues who are going to be also presenting with me today. One is Nicole Brennan. She's our executive director here, and she's overseeing the consensus-based entity contract itself. Also, obviously works a lot with endorsement and maintenance, as well as our primer or pre-rulemaking recommendations and measure set review work, which formerly was called the Measure Applications Partnership at the National Quality Forum. So she'll be presenting here in a little bit. And then Brenna Rabel, who's our deputy director over the consensus-based entity contract. She is heavily involved with the primer work, also supporting aspects of the endorsement and maintenance work as well, and supporting other aspects of the contract with Nicole. I said myself, Matt Pickering, I am the task lead here at Battelle, overseeing the endorsement and maintenance activities, which you'll learn more about today. And then we also have Jeff Geppert, who's our senior research leader. He and his team help to provide scientific expertise to our measurement work, as well as strategies as well for how we want to move forward with our tasks. Next slide. Here, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Nicole, and she will go ahead and introduce what we'll be talking about today and kick us off. So Nicole, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Super, thank you. And let me just please echo Matt's gratitude for being here today, for being nominated, accepting the committee spot. We know that this is a big undertaking and a lot of unknowns as you go into this year about how is this going to work, and what will we be talking about, and what are the shifts in perspective and focus. And we really hope that we can get that across for you today, and that you don't leave today with questions about what's coming to you next or what we are expecting from you. So please, use the Q&A, as Matt said, to ask us as many questions as you have. We want this to be as clear and concise and helpful for you as possible today. So hold us accountable to that, because we really want you to know what we're thinking and what materials we're generating for you, and really what's next for everybody on the committees. So go ahead to the next slide. I think really importantly, in all of our communication too, we are trying to make sure that you know the resources that are available. So what are the definitions related to the committees? How are we going to evaluate the measures? Where can you find just any information about the upcoming webinars? And maybe for some of you, like, what is a quality measure and what's it intending to do? And how do I learn more about quality measure development? So here in this slide deck, we have links for you for all of these helpful resources. The guidebook is going to be really critical for understanding endorsement and maintenance and how we're thinking about it. And then even over to the measures management side, this blueprint, that website has everything from quality measurement 101 to really descriptions on how measures are developed in each part of their life cycle. So these are really meant to be helpful, informative resources for you, and we'll continue to promote them and make sure that you have the links. But if you ever have a question at any point, don't hesitate to reach out to us, because we can send you some of these. We can join a call with you. We can go over any aspect of this. We want you to feel like you have all the tools available to you to do your job. Next slide. So I'm not going to spend too much time here, because I feel like if you're currently on one of our committees, then you have a solid understanding of Battelle and the quality, or in the Partnership for Quality Measurement. But just as a quick overview, go ahead on to the next slide. Battelle has been working in the field of applied science and technology for a really long time. And as the world's largest nonprofit, what we really focus on is solving the world's most difficult challenges. And I think we can all agree that healthcare policy would fall firmly within that definition. And what we've been trying to do in the years leading up to this is really provide insight and science and rigor to how measures are reviewed and seen and thought of, and how we understand the impact of them to the people who are working with them every day, or the people that they are meant to help in the healthcare system. So with that, moving on to the next slide, Battelle has become a consensus-based entity. We've been that for several years. And really, what does that mean? It means that we are well-versed and well-practiced in bringing communities together to discuss and make decisions. And I think really that is what we're trying to work with this group on, is how do we have the dialogue that we need to have in order to make really important decisions? Who needs to be in the room? Who needs to be weighing in? And what does a decision really look like for the thing that's right in front of you? What does it mean for a measure to be a good measure, a meaningful measure, an important measure? And in order to answer those questions, we need the right people in the room, and we need them weighing in on those discussions. And then we have to come to an understanding of what is it that we are saying is being endorsed? What are we putting ourselves behind the measure, saying we believe in this, we think it's really important, and are all of the voices that will be impacted by it being part of that conversation. So you'll see that reflected in the size of our committees and the number of people that we have and how we're trying to collect the information. And all of that is part of this National Consensus Development and Strategic Planning for Healthcare Quality Measurement contract that Battelle has through the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services that we have taken over the past year, and we use this to kind of fund the work, but it is independent of CMS, and it is meant to be for the community that it is serving. Next slide. So I think we've talked about this many times before about what our vision is for endorsement and maintenance, but it really is quite iterative on how we will do the work. We want to always be improving, but at its base, we always want it to be transparent. We always want the decisions to be transparent. We want them to be attainable and meaningful, and we want you to be able to rely on us to do the same thing and to do what we said we were going to do. And we really do appreciate your feedback as we go through this and try to make the processes as effective and efficient as possible. Next slide. So let's just touch on a little bit about who is in the room and what will this look like moving forward as far as being on a committee and what your role is. If you move to the next slide, you can see there are 5 committees. So what you should have received over the past couple of months, once you accepted your role onto a committee, you should know at this point which committee you are going to be on. And committees are also called projects here. So which project will you be working with? What is your role on the committee? So will you be part of a recommendations group or an advisory group? And sort of what is your term limit on that committee? So anywhere between 1 to 3 years. Moving forward, as we accept new committee members on, everybody will receive a 3-year committee assignment. But in this initial year, we did have to kind of structure it so that everybody wasn't leaving their committees at the exact same time. So if you do not know which of these projects you're working on or what committee or part of the committee you're working on, reach out to us so we can make sure that you get that communication again and have clarity on what you'll be seeing in the coming weeks. So in front of you, again, these are the 5 projects. These are the areas they cover and the types of measures that each of the committees would be seeing related to these projects. We do want to try and make sure that committees are getting measures throughout each of the cycles and that we're really using your expertise. So we may evolve these areas of coverage. We may evolve how the projects are broken down, and that'll just be another thing that we will love to hear your feedback on as we get through this first cycle. Next slide. Each committee has anywhere, I would say, between 40 and 60 people. We're shooting for more towards the 60 side, so it's quite a large number of people on each committee. But again, that was really rooted in the idea of meeting the right people and the right representation to ensure that when a measure is endorsed through the Partnership for Quality Measurement, that it really is the partnership as a whole that is putting their name behind a measure and saying this is a measure that we think is important enough to be endorsed. In order to do that, you need a number of people to be part of that conversation and really weighing in. So each project has been broken into an advisory group and a recommendations group. Again, this is really well broken down in the guidebook, sort of what each part will be doing and what your role will be. But it's really important that you feel and know that no matter which part of this you are sitting on, you are incredibly important to our work and the decisions being made. So even if you are on the advisory group, and we can go to the next slide, which is primarily working in the review and initial evaluation, submitting those evaluations back, and then it goes over to the recommendations group to discuss them during the meeting where everybody can kind of hear that discussion. Everybody is voting on the measures. If you have been part of the primer process up to this point, that is a big distinction between the two. In endorsement and maintenance, everybody is going to vote during that meeting. So we are really looking for you to provide your inputs on the measure so that when we go over to the recommendations group, we're having the right discussions. We are, addressing any areas of disagreement between members of the committees, that we're looking at the public comment, and then everybody's coming together to make the vote around the measure. Really, I'll come back to this again, but I cannot stress enough that your presence here is super important to the outcome and the success of the work. Next slide. You can kind of see here just how the committees are broken down as far as, roster and type. And, we don't want to be reductive and put people into very specific categories. We completely recognize that everybody on the committee has been part of a healthcare journey, and everybody has been a patient. and that many of you may serve as both a clinician and a rural health expert, and many of you may have multiple aspects of these categories. What we've really tried to do is kind of say, okay, if you had to choose, one area that you really feel is your thing, is where you focus the amount of your time, or the area that you want to be representing on the committee, which of these would it be? And we've tried to assign people to a roster category, and then really make sure that we are filling as many of these slots as possible, so that we do have good representation from the people who are most impacted, from patients, families, caregivers. We've allotted a number of spots and are really focusing on recruiting around that area, and clinicians as well. We want to make sure that clinicians are being heard as far as burden and impact on the measures. Next slide. This is my last slide before I turn it. Oh, sorry. Next slide after. No, sorry, right there. So this is my last slide before I turn things over to Brenna Rabel. So going back to that piece about, who's on each committee, we worked really hard. We had over 500 nominations for the committees, and we spent a lot of time looking through each person's nomination form and trying to make sure that we had balanced and diverse groups and individuals within each committee, and that we were able to get sort of the perspective from each of those roster categories. So you being part of this is really important, and your participation and ability to be present during the meetings is super, super critical. You will see later on, there's areas around, quorum that we have to obtain in order to get a specific number of votes, in order to feel confident about our decision for the endorsement of a measure. And if members don't show up, then we can't finalize those votes during the meeting. And we'd really like to do that, because it reduces the amount of time and effort that you have to commit to these meetings before, during, and after. So if you have seen the date that your committee is going to be meeting, or you, after this meeting, think, that sounds like a lot more than I knew I was signing up for, I'm really glad that I saw this, but maybe not this year. Please reach out. We want to make this work for you. We want to make sure that you're involved. But we also want to make sure that people who are signing up are able to attend the meetings and are able to participate during each of the meetings. So please work with us at any time if you have questions about what is expected, what the next meeting is, how long it will be. If you have questions about how much work you'll have to do before, during, or after the meeting, please let us know. We want this to be a meaningful experience for you, and then we want the result to be meaningful to the community that it is meant to serve. So with that, I think I am turning it over to Brenna.
Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah.
All right. So as Nicole said, and as Matt said in his introductions, I am Brenna Rabel, and I am the technical director that is overseeing this work alongside Nicole and Matt and the rest of the team. And so my hope is that these next few slides are going to serve mostly as a refresher on how this process is going to play out, and that no one feels like you're hearing all of this for the first time. But as with the material that Nicole covered, much of what I'll go through today is detailed in the E&M guidebook, which is available on the E&M tab within the PQM website. So please do take a look at that document if you need a deeper dive on anything that we covered here. Go to the next slide. So we've designed this process to enable really productive discussions about all of the measures that are up for endorsement review, where information is exchanged efficiently and freely between committee members, Battelle, and measure developers and stewards. We've really strived to increase the overall engagement in this work, both by making public comment easy to navigate and by collecting in-depth committee feedback from a larger group of individuals, both in writing and in the actual recommendation group meetings. In both the composition of our committees and in the ground rules we've established, we're continually striving toward inclusivity and representation. while also keeping, the discussions on target and within scope. So we're going to dive into a lot of the specifics of how we plan to achieve all of these things in these next few slides. So we can go ahead to the next one. So this is the timeline for a typical year consisting of 2 E&M cycles. Because we committed to carrying over the prior endorsement and maintenance process for measures that had been submitted via our predecessor, we are starting this process fresh for the fall measure review cycle in 2023. And that kicked off this year on October 1st with an intent to submit deadline. So we are now in this internal review and public comment portion of the timeline. And as members of the E&M committees, your involvement is really going to be ramping up pretty significantly once that public comment period ends, so starting primarily in January. The timeline overall is designed to be completed start to finish in 6 months, which avoids overlap between cycles, hopefully makes lives easier both among committee members and measure submitters, and also makes it easier and more timely for measure developers to resubmit measures that need to undergo changes between cycles. So in the next few slides, I'm going to talk through the steps that go into this process. But again, if you'd like to take a closer look at this timeline specifically, a version of it is in the guidebook. So next slide. Okay, so this really is just a summary of the 6 major steps in our E&M process that enable us to complete this work in 6 months. So as I said, we've already completed intent to submit as of October 1 and full measure submission a month later on November 1st. Highlighted in the dark blue here is where we are right now, where Battelle staff are conducting detailed internal reviews of the measure submissions, checking for clarity and completeness, and that's concurrent with a public comment period, which is also open, which collects broader inputs on the measures. So our team compiles all of the measure submission information and public comment information for your consideration as committee members. You'll have several weeks to review the measure materials and complete independent reviews of each measure assigned to your committee. And then our team will compile those sort of preliminary reviews and use your feedback to guide the discussions during the recommendation group meetings. And then following the recommendation group meetings and votes, we'll post the endorsement decisions publicly on our website, and that'll trigger an opportunity for any organizations or individuals to request an appeal if they believe that the evaluation criteria have either not been appropriately applied or perhaps the process was maybe carried out incorrectly or inconsistently across measures. And if that felt like a rushed overview, don't worry, we're going to go into each one of these steps over the next few slides. You can go to the next one. Okay, so as promised, quick summary of each one. For context and background, we're going to begin with the intent to submit deadline. So as the first step in the process, intent to submit is really what kicks off each cycle. So for the fall cycle, that's October 1st. The spring cycle, that's April 1st. And this step is really just when measure developers submit high-level information about any measures they plan to submit in the upcoming cycle. And this really just helps our team plan for the likely number of measures that are going to be up for review in any given cycle. Next slide. A month after the intent to submit deadline, measure developers are required to submit all of their measure materials to Battelle for review. These materials include the measure specifications, testing information, completed submission forms, and basically they'll just make up the total sum of information that committee members will have on which to base their evaluation. And all of those materials are submitted to us via our STAR database. So it's where we have our measure repository. The next slide, please. So once we have all that information in hand, which we now do, we begin our internal reviews of the measure materials. So initially, that just means we're assessing for like overall completeness and communicating with measure developers or measure stewards about any gaps that we might see in their submissions. But next, our team completes initial assessments of each measure against the E&M evaluation criteria as detailed in the guidebook. So these criteria are largely unchanged from prior cycles, so you should certainly recognize the domains of importance, feasibility, scientific acceptability, and use and usability. We have also added an equity criterion this year, but since this is new and largely untested, this one is both optional and fairly open-ended. So it's really only going to be used, on our end to sort of inform any potential future testing requirements related to equity, and will just be supplemental information for the committee to have. This whole process of the internal reviews takes a little over a month, so we do it in concert with the public comment period for the sake of efficiency. So we can go to the next slide. So again, while our staff are busy reviewing all those measure materials, we post that information to the PQM website for public comment for a period of about 30 days. All the comments that are received via the website are going to be viewable by the public in their raw verbatim form. It usually takes about 24 to 48 hours for our team to just make sure that there's no spam, but then they'll get posted in their raw form on the website itself. This makes it so that both the public can see what's been commented on, and it also means that measure developers can see the content of public comments about their measures as they roll in. Our team also produces a summary of public comments following the close of the public comment period, where comments are grouped by measure and theme to make for easier review among committee members. Go to the next slide. Okay, so now we get to your involvement as a committee member. So following the public comment, you're going to have about 3 weeks to conduct independent written reviews of each of the measures assigned to your committee. To aid you, Battelle is going to be providing you all of those measure submission materials, our staff's preliminary assessments of each measure, and the public comment information alongside the evaluation rubric, which will just serve as a framework to help guide your reviews. Once you submit to us all of your feedback, our team compiles those inputs to identify areas where consensus may have already been reached, as well as to identify areas of non-consensus where it would be beneficial to devote some discussion time during the recommendation group meetings. Next slide. So here is where the process starts to look very different from years past. So those of you who have participated in this process before, this is where, you'll probably notice some real changes. So if you're a member of the advisory group, the bulk of your input about each measure is going to be collected via those written independent reviews that I just talked about. If you're a member of the recommendation group, your job includes participating in the recommendation group meeting, where we'll attempt to build some consensus around each measure, specifically targeting some of the stickier aspects of the measures that are identified in your independent reviews. Now, having said that, and as Nicole said in her remarks, we do encourage advisory group members to join the recommendation group meetings to listen in on the discussion in case any of the points that are made during those meetings change your understanding of a given measure, and by extension, your assessment of that measure. That said, even if you are an advisory group member who is unable to attend that meeting, we will be summarizing the group's deliberations afterwards. And we'll share those summaries with all of you to review prior to submitting your final votes on each measure. We'll go to the next slide. So finalizing the endorsement decision isn't as simple as just holding a vote and then posting it. There are some really crucial requirements that we will need your help as committee members to meet in order for these decisions to be considered final. So the first, of course, is that we need to actually meet the discussion quorum for the recommendation group meeting. So this means that at least 60% of all recommendation group members must be present for the roll call at the beginning of the meeting for us to even hold these measure discussions. Then following the meetings and the receipt of the recommendation group meeting summary, we're going to need at least 80% of all active, non-recused committee members from across both the recommendation group and the advisory group to actually place their votes on the measures. Only once we've received votes from 80% of active members can we post those endorsement decisions for public awareness and to kick off any potential appeals consideration. Next slide. So we've tried really hard to simplify and streamline the possible endorsement outcomes, both to maximize clarity and also actionability for measure developers and stewards. So starting with the most obvious outcome, a new or maintenance measure can be endorsed if 75% or more of the voting committee members agree that it meets the endorsement criteria. So for any measure that receives endorsement, the expectation is that those measures will be resubmitted every 5 years for re-endorsement with an annual update review that starts at 3 years. Now, there may be measures that largely meet the criteria for endorsement, but more information may need to be collected regarding that measure once in use to support that recommendation. So in that case, a new or maintenance measure may be endorsed with conditions, which means that 75% or more of the voting members agree that the endorsement criteria are met, but that there are very specific recommendations that the committee members would like to see achieved when the measure comes back for maintenance. So what that would mean for those measures is that when they do come back for maintenance in 5 years, that there would be very specific requirements in addition to the standard criteria that would need to be met in order for re-endorsement to be achieved. For new measures that don't meet endorsement criteria, so where 75% or more voting members agree that the criteria are not met, those measures would receive a not endorsed designation. But again, that only applies to new measures. For maintenance measures that don't meet the criteria, endorsement will be considered to be removed. Having said that, there are other ways for endorsement to be removed outside of the committee's assessment, such as when a measure steward opts to retire a measure or opts against submitting the measure for re-endorsement, or when that measure has been determined to be topped up. Next slide. Since the endorsement with conditions is a little bit complicated, we just wanted to spend a couple more minutes describing some of the nuance here. So based on the way that we've written the criteria, there are a handful of scenarios in which we envision that a measure may receive this designation. So the most likely scenario is where a new measure has been tested enough to meet minimum requirements, but where additional testing, either across a larger population or at the accountable entity level, or even just at an entirely different level of analysis, may be needed to add confidence to that endorsement decision. So in those instances, typically those measures, would only be able to undergo that level of analysis once they're actually in use, right? So we would give them an endorsement with conditions, and the conditions would be that we have that new data when it comes time for maintenance that we can review. So another possibility would be where a measure is already being used in a quality improvement context to some effect, and the committee wants to see how it performs in an accountability context. So now that's not comprehensive, but those are just sort of kind of like two of the types of conditions that might apply to a measure that is endorsed with conditions. With that said, there are several non-negotiable areas where a measure is absolutely not eligible for endorsement or endorsement with conditions. So these include things like lack of a clear business case or lack of evidence supporting that business case, poor feasibility related to measure implementation, such as where data availability is limited for crucial data elements, inappropriate methodology, calculations, formulas, or testing approaches to demonstrate reliability or validity. And this is just because scientific acceptability is absolutely crucial, and it's essential that these domains are tested appropriately. Another would be instances where specifications, testing approach, results, or data descriptions are insufficient for evaluation. And then finally, any instances where a measure has already been endorsed with conditions, is resubmitted for maintenance, but then has not met the conditions that were laid out during initial endorsement. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is just a visual depiction of those 75% thresholds for each voting outcome. So again, this is described in detail in the E&M guidebook, and we will remind you of these thresholds prior to voting, during voting. But for your reference, we're basically looking for 75% agreement in any given category for a decision to be reached. If no consensus is reached based on those 75% thresholds, then the measure is considered to be not endorsed. And then all of these decisions are considered final unless an appeal is requested and conducted. So go to the next slide. So once voting is complete, we enter the ad hoc appeals period. So we're going to post endorsement decisions to the PQM website, at which point any interested party can submit a request for an appeal for any of the E&M endorsement decisions. An internal Battelle team will then assess the appeals request for eligibility. So in other words, to determine whether the appeal is truly warranted. And then if so, an ad hoc appeals committee will be convened to conduct the appeals discussion. Next slide. So process-wise, appeals are conducted as described here. So requests for an appeal are submitted via the PQM website, citing evidence based on the appeals criteria, which are outlined in the guidebook. The Battelle team will then do that preliminary review of the request to determine whether the appeals criteria are met. And if so, then we convene a committee comprised of the chairs from all of that cycle's E&M committees to conduct an appeals review. Decisions from that appeals meeting would then be posted to the website, and then that would be considered the final decision. Next slide. So in summary, once measures are voted on by the committee, endorsement decisions are posted to the website and deemed to be final. So there is no CSAC or anything anymore to sort of validate committee decisions. So if no appeals are requested, or if an appeal request is made but denied, then the original endorsement decision from the committee meeting stands. If the appeal is requested and deemed eligible for further review, then the decision coming out of that appeals discussion will be posted, and that will then be deemed the final decision. In both cases, all of those decisions will be compiled into a final technical report, which will be delivered to CMS and published publicly by the end of February, the beginning of March. So with that, I will turn us to the next slide and turn it back to Matt.
Great. Thank you so much, Brenna. And just a reminder for folks, if you've gotten questions after hearing what Nicole and Brenna have been talking about, you can definitely use the Q&A feature, and folks are actively using that, so that's great. We will answer some of those questions, if not through text. We'll answer those at the end of the talk today, while the portion where we'll do some answering of questions that we've received. So please go ahead and submit those. I'll also just circle back to what Brenna had mentioned. You know, she focused in on a lot of what the committee will be responsible for, both these independent reviews, as well as attending these endorsement meetings, and then also obviously rendering an endorsement decision on measures by vote. After that, it really goes out to an appeal. So the committee is done with their work. The co-chairs of those committees may still not be done because the co-chairs of all 5 committees will constitute the appeals committee, which would be convened only if an appeal is received after the endorsement decision has been posted. So again, the committee's job is pretty much done at the end of the endorsement meeting for that given cycle, except for the co-chairs, who may have to participate in an appeals meeting if an appeal is received. We are in the process right now of finalizing our co-chairs, and so we hope to have those co-chair appointments settled before the end of the year, thus kicking off next year and getting into the endorsement meetings with our co-chairs. Lastly, before I go into our timeline for fall 2023, I do recognize, well, we all recognize this is a lot of information. You may have not participated in this work before. This may be very new for you. You may have seen measures, heard of measures. You may have actually developed measures too. So we do have a very a wide variety of perspectives that are on our committees, and we recognize that this is all very new, a lot of information. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. Even when we get into the endorsement meetings, we will, Battelle staff will be there to be that resource for our committee members and our chairs to understand, like, okay, what's the process here? What's our next step here? So please don't feel like you have to walk away knowing all of this, A to B, backwards and forwards. We are here throughout the course of every cycle to help answer those questions and guide the committee meetings based on our process. So let's talk about fall 2023. Let's go to the next slide and just give a timeline of where we are and what's happening here. So as Brennan mentioned, we have 2 intent to submit opportunities, one for fall and one for spring. The fall cycle for our new process just kicked off. That was October 1st, but it actually fell on a Sunday, so it went to October 2nd. That's been completed. So measures have been submitted as far as intent to submit for the fall 2023 cycle. And then the full measure submissions happened right after that, a month later on November 1st. So that's been completed. I'll let this committee everybody here on the call, all the committee members know that for fall 2023, we have 18 measures total. So it is a reduced cycle as far as the number of measures that are being reviewed. Those are going to be spread across the 5 projects. And so for the fall 2023 cycle, some projects may have 5 measures, whereas one project actually has 1 measure to review for the fall 2023 cycle. Again, those 18 are spread across those 5. They're submitted by developers or stewards to us, naming the project of interest, and Battelle staff either will reassign that measure to another project based on the measure focus or the alignment with expertise with a given committee. So we may move those around, but the measure developers are usually the ones also submitting what committee they want the measure to be evaluated against. On average, anywhere between 5 or maybe up to 10 measures per committee, depending on the cycle, depending on the number of measures coming in, both either maintenance measures, which are measures that are already endorsed, but need to come back through the process for maintenance review, as Brendan mentioned, every 5 years typically, or new measures. They've never come through the process before, or maybe they did, but they didn't, they got their endorsement removed, so the developer is resubmitting it as a new measure, for example. So those are a mixture between maintenance and new measures is what we'll get each cycle. And again, you're anywhere between 5 to 10 of those. And again, for this fall 2023, we have 18 total that we spread out across the 5 projects. And like I mentioned, we have 1 project having 1 measure and a couple projects having 5 measures as the most. So after we've done the full measure submission, staff have reviewed those measures and made sure that information is there and attachments are there that are needed. We then go into the staff internal review. This is where Battelle staff do what's called staff assessments. If you've worked with prior consensus-based entity, the National Quality Forum before, these are what were the preliminary analyses. So these staff assessments are a very succinct summary of measure information that's been submitted by the developer or steward related to the domain that is being evaluated for the measure. So we'll touch on those domains here in a little bit. But the staff assessments are really pulling out the key pieces of information that are both strengths with the measure, but also potential weaknesses. And those staff assessments are just a starting point, and they're really to help inform committee members of maybe some issues that they need to dig into and discuss a little bit more, or benefits with the measure, things that are positive and strengths with the measure that the committee should also consider as well. So those staff assessments will be available to the committee once you go into the independent reviews. And before the independent reviews, in parallel or in concordance with the staff assessments is the public comment. So like I mentioned, those 18 measures, they're posted for public comment right now. So if you navigated to our homepage on the p4qm.org, you'll see a little card at the very top about public comment opportunities. It says what's new. There's 2 of them right now. There's the measures under consideration for the primer work, but there's also the public commenting opportunity for the fall 2023 measures. If you click on that, you can then see the measure, and you can also see all of the attachments with the measure, which are the full measure specifications. So I think there was a question about that, about seeing that information. You can actually see that now through public comment. And as comments start to come in, those comments will be appended to the bottom of the page where that measure is posted on our website. So the bottom of the page will list all the comments that will come in this 30-day period. Again, so our committee members can review those in advance of the meeting and also have those public comments ready for you when you look at the independent committee review period. And then also developers and stewards can also see the public comments that have come in on their measures and also prepare potential responses to those when we get into the endorsement meetings themselves. So after the public comment period closes, and it's in January 2nd of next year, we then will kick off the independent committee review. So that's that 3-week period where you will be asked to use the PQM measure evaluation rubric to rate each domain of using the rubric for the measure. And so there are 5 domains we'll touch on here in a little bit, I'll show you, but you're just using the rubric to then rate each domain using that rubric and determine whether or not those domains have been met, not met, or maybe not met, but addressable. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But after the independent committee reviews, we then will go into the endorsement meetings. It expands over 2 weeks because we have 5 committees. Each committee has a full day meeting, or the first day is usually the larger day meeting, plus a backup meeting. Now, if you are on the primary prevention committee, that committee first meeting is not a full day. It's not a 10 to 5 meeting. The reason being is because you're the committee that has one measure for this cycle. So we don't anticipate having you on the call for a full day, but we do have a shorter amount of time for that committee meeting. Each committee will also have a backup meeting, which is scheduled the next day, right after the full day meeting. This is just in case something happens in the first day that we weren't able to get through all of the committee's business that day, and we have to bleed over into the backup meeting. But we will cancel the backup meetings if we are able to complete everything during the day of. What prohibits us from completing that? If the committee really digs into an issue, make it off focus or off track, that can prolong conversations. In addition, quorum is another big issue. Brenna and Nicole both stressed this, and I'll stress this as well. Quorum is very, very important, both for us to conduct and evaluate these measures, but also just to convene the committee overall. You saw there was 2 different percentages, the 60 and 80%. The 60% is based on the recommendations group attendance to discuss the measure, whereas the 80% is the voting quorum that is with the larger group, advisory and recommendations group combined. We take those estimates during the meeting. So we determine whether or not we can first have the discussion by making sure we have at least 60% of the recommendation group members on the call. And then we'll determine if we can vote on the measures by ensuring we have at least 80% of the combined group on the call. If we are not able to have voting quorum, meaning that we don't have the 80%, we haven't met that for all the active members, we are not able to vote during the meeting. This means we can discuss the measures, but we have to collect the votes offline, and we have to send out a meeting recording, which will be for the full day, and try to collect votes from those members who were not able to attend the call. So it's very important that we really, really stress to try to please block off those days. We try to send them out a few months in advance so that hopefully we can ensure that you've blocked off that time in order for us to complete all of the business during that day. If we don't, we have to do these offline votes, we have to have the backup meetings, and we have to prolong the time for when we can actually announce the endorsement decision for those measures. So it's very, very important that you please try to block off that time frame and attend those meetings. And we understand that life does happen. So if you do find that you are just completely unable to attend the call, please let us know as soon as possible, so that we can strategize if a quorum is going to be a challenge. And after that, committee endorsement meetings are done. We then move into the appeals period, which then leads into a final endorsement decision after the appeals committee meeting, if we needed to convene it. Next slide, please. So now I'll just touch a little bit more about those independent reviews, because that's really going to be where the work really starts for our committee members. It's going to be next year in January. So on January 2nd, you will get an email notification letting you know that measures are available for you to review within the P4QM website. And so you must create an account to access that, and I'll show you that here in a little bit. So let's go to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit more about this. And the resources that you'll need, just resurfacing this slide from earlier, the E&M guidebook, you can find that on our webpage by going to the E&M tab and going to the About page. You can see it linked there. The measure evaluation rubric itself, that is also within the E&M guidebook. It's actually Appendix D. These are hyperlinked. If you have the PDF of the slides from the event page for today's meeting, these are hyperlinked within those slides. But again, you can find the rubric as Appendix D in the E&M guidebook. In addition, there's a worksheet that will also show you today. This worksheet is also posted on our events page and will be available on our E&M About page as well. But that worksheet is just a supplemental material For our committee members that may not be too familiar with how to evaluate these types of measures using this evaluation rubric, this worksheet sort of helps guide you through that process. It asks you some questions related to the domain, and you answer yes or no. And that helps kind of guide your decision making on whether or not you think this domain has been met, not met, or maybe not met, but addressable. And I'll show you that here in a second too. Lastly, we want to make sure that you have a user account, which I'll show here in a little bit. In order to access the measures to review, in order to submit your independent reviews, you must have a user account. And we sent emails out about this earlier, but we'll walk through how to do that here in a second. But you just go through our PQM website to make a user account, and you must have that to be able to review measures. You also will need to complete a measure-specific disclosure of interest form. You may have received an email earlier today. If not, you'll be receiving one later this week. This will have a PDF form. This takes no more than 5 minutes to complete. We must have this form completed before every cycle in order for you to participate for the cycle and the endorsement meeting. We want to ensure that there are no major conflicts that we need to disclose during the endorsement meetings. So if you as a committee member, let's say that you participated on a technical expert panel that was involved in the development of a measure that's currently being evaluated by your committee, you need to disclose that in this form. And this form just asks questions about, what level of involvement did you have? So you just disclose that in the form. The TEL staff will then review that against our conflict of interest policy to determine whether or not a recusal is necessary. A recusal just means that you can discuss the measure, but you just can't vote. So you as a TEP participant with the developer, and you are also on the committee, you can discuss the measure. You can discuss your perspectives. You can maybe even share what's been discussed in the TEP that you were involved in. You just cannot vote on the measure. So, but we need to know that information through these measure disclosure of interest forms. So if you receive that email, it's good to get it back to us by the deadline. I believe we're giving you a deadline of December 22nd. This will list out all the measures being evaluated for your committee that cycle, and you just need to let us know if you've had any potential conflicts. We will then confirm if those conflicts would result in any recusal or not. Okay, next slide, please. So I mentioned these domains, right? So there are 5. There are 5 domains of the PQM measure evaluation rubric. And so these are aspects of the measure that we are going to be evaluating. And it is in order, and how the measure information is presented, it'll flow in order of this when we start with importance. But importance is really getting at whether or not there's an evidence base for this measure, right? There is a business case here that is supported by evidence as well. The business case meaning the existence and use of the measure itself will actually lead to some beneficial outcome. So there is some sort of business case that there needs to be a measure here, and that's based on evidence. It's also based on quality care gaps, right? So if we know that this is an important area of healthcare, we also want to see that there's a gap. What are the sort of percentages look like with that measure across the populations is being measured. We want to see the variation around that. So we just want to see if there is this gap, as well as a business case for the measure. This kind of gets to this importance. In addition to that, we also want to know if the patient population that's being captured in the measure actually finds the measure, or whether or not the measure is measuring an outcome, actually finds it meaningful. So this can come from like literature reviews. The developer may have focus groups or patient panels that can provide this information, but we want to know this in the importance domain. For feasibility is really just wanting to make sure that the measure is feasible to implement. It's feasible to use. So the codes are electronic, or if there's paper-based types of chasing that needs to happen, we want to ensure that that's not going to cause any undue burden. It's not too far outside of the processes of care that, again, will limit and cause issues with the use and implementation of the measure. We also want to know if there's any licensing fees. Again, that's thinking about prohibiting the use of the measure. For scientific acceptability, this is now getting into reliability and validity. So we want to know if the measure is it can be consistently calculated. We want to know if the score itself could be is a true reflection of poor or good care. Validity, we're also looking at the accuracy of the data elements as well. So this is one of the bigger aspects of our rubric, and one of the bigger pieces of a measure submission is the reliability and validity. And there's reliability and validity testing that goes along with that, which the developer conducts certain types of statistical tests, or may do face validity types of assessments to better show that the measure is either valid and reliable. So the equity domain is a new domain under this endorsement and maintenance work. You can see it's listed as optional. So that means it is an optional domain for this first cycle, and maybe something that may be optional next cycle. We're really putting it out there to be more exploratory and see what type of information we're getting back from developers. Obviously, there's a huge focus on improving health equity and reducing disparities in this country, and that doesn't escape quality measures either. And so the equity domain is really trying to get a sense of, can this measure actually identify disparities? Can it actually improve health equity in some way? And we want to see if the developer can communicate that to us in some way. They can do statistical tests. They may be able to support some information from literature, but we are really trying to see what type of information we can gather with having this domain in existence. And again, it's optional. So if the developer does not answer this question, it's okay. It's optional because it will not make or break the endorsement decision at this time. Then there's use and usability. So this is the extent to see, is the measure being used, and how is it being used? What type of program is it being used? And if it is used in a program, is it used for quality improvement? Is it used for benchmarking? Is it used for accountability? We want to know that information, either for a new measure, if there's a plan for that type of use, or if it's an existing measure, right? We want to know what kind of program it's being used in, and is that actually leading to any change? So is it actionable? Is there any improvement happening on the score over time? That's where we get into this usability component of this domain. So is there anything that the accountable entities are doing to improve on that score? Or if there are potential barriers to them improving on that score, are there any types of facilitators that can overcome or mitigate those barriers? We want to see if the developer has disclosed any of that. And lastly, with this usability component, we want to know if there's any unintended consequences happening. So if the measure is actually being used, right, and it's actually being used in the healthcare system and being used in some programs, is it leading to any unintended consequences? And are those, if there are any unintended consequences, are the benefits of the measure still outweigh those unintended consequences? So that's part of this usability component of this domain as well. Next slide, please. So I mentioned rating these domains. So I mentioned met and not met but addressable. So each of those 5 domains, we will ask you to rate them, all right, based on the information that the developer has submitted and your review of that information. You'll rate them to say, yes, that domain is met based on what the developer has submitted and based on what this domain is really looking at or really trying to get to. So the measure meets all those aspirations or assertions of that respective domain. There could be not met but addressable. So it doesn't meet all those aspects or assertions of the domain, but the measure can be changed, or there's something that the developer can do that is a reasonable change to overcome any weaknesses that have been found or any inefficiencies with the measure. So this not met but addressable starts to get into that endorsed with conditions types of final decision, right? If there's a lot of things with the measure that may need to be addressed that you may have identified, that may lead you to thinking at the endorsement meeting that you may want to place endorse with conditions on there, and those conditions would be clearly stated. So this is what this domain sort of starts getting towards. And then there's not met, right? The measure information does not meet those assertions or aspirations of the respective domain, and there's really no reasonable changes that can be done. So for example, right, I mentioned, we saw on the endorsement with conditions, like there's no clear business case for the measure, meaning that there's no confidence that you have that the existence of this measure based on the developer has submitted can actually improve outcomes, whether it be patient outcomes or cost or something that the developer has said that the existence of this measure would do. So if there's no clear business case, that could be an example where maybe something is not met, right? Those are the 3 ratings that you'll want to place on each one of those 5 domains. And I'll show you here in a little bit. Each one of those ratings has some criteria that help to help for your decision making, and also the worksheet that we have will help walk you through that as well. Next slide, please. I did want to draw your attention as well to differences with our rubric, right, and how we evaluate new measures versus maintenance measures. So again, a new measure is a measure coming for its initial endorsement. So a measure is brand new, it's newly developed, and it's now coming to Patel for endorsement with one of our committees. There's also that example I mentioned earlier where it could have been an endorsed measure, that endorsement was removed, and the developer maybe did some changes and now is resubmitting it as a new measure. So it would go back and be considered a new measure, even though it lost endorsement previously. And then there's the maintenance measures, like we mentioned before. It's already endorsed. It's coming back for a maintenance review cycle, which under our new process is every 5 years, unless some conditions are placed on it, or some other scenarios happen, which we need to do an off-cycle review. But there are distinctions between what we should focus on, depending if it's a new measure or a maintenance measure. And those distinctions are labeled in these brackets within the rubric. And you can see them highlighted in yellow there. For initial endorsement, when you see that, that aspect of the domain is really intended for a new measure. When it says maintenance, that's really intended for if the measure is maintenance measure. So if it's a new measure, if it says something for maintenance there, that's not applicable for a new measure. If it's not listed on either, so you can see attach a logic model, summarize the evidence, that means we should be applying that for both, whether it's a new measure or maintenance measure, regardless. Next slide, please. Lastly, I'll just, before I go into some screen sharing here, just wanted to draw attention to the star again. Brennan had mentioned this early on. When developers are submitting measures to Patel, they submit through the star. But the star has 2 sort of functions. It's a database and also a measure submission tool. The database function is available right now on our website. It's if you've looked around on the National Quality Forum site and their quality positioning system, or QPS, where you would find measures. This is a very similar type of database where it has all of that information about the last time the measure was endorsed, upcoming maintenance cycles, high-level descriptions of that. And we'll also, as measures are starting to be submitted to Patel, post the measure specifications or the most recent specifications of the measure since it was last submitted to Patel for review. So that is available on our website now. And then I mentioned the submission function of it. So there is a submission tool in which you would then, the developers would create accounts and submit their measure for any given cycle, and it would go through the process. I mentioned earlier that you also have to get an account. So you must also register to get an account, and it's very easy to set up. And I'm going to show you here that in a little bit. I believe next slide, I think that's when I start screen sharing. Yes, okay. So I will go ahead and screen share and show you a few of these things here. Okay. All right. Okay. So what I'm showing here, I just wanted to navigate, and I'm logged into the system. So you see some of these features up here. This is my account access. So it's very different from if you log into the system. You won't see these types of views up here. But I just wanted to draw attention to the meeting event page for today. That's what's listed here. You can see here's some of these resources we've been going through. There's the agenda for the day. Here's the slide deck we've been going through. When I mentioned there's those hyperlinks on those slides, here's the slide deck if you want to use that or share this around. And here's this evaluation rubric, which we'll touch on here in a little bit. Just wanted to show you where that is. You can find this events page by going to our calendar on our homepage. If you scroll down, it's the first thing listed because it's today. But you can also just expand the calendar and find those resources if needed. We will be building out a resources page to list all of this information in the future. But in case you're wondering where those slides are, that's where it is. The recording for today as well will be posted to that same events page. So that will be posted about a week from today. I want to show you also where to find the E&M guidebook. So if you click on our E&M page here and you go to About, this is where you'll find a link to our E&M guidebook, which is right here. The About page just has some basic information about the E&M process and guidebook. There will be more information we'll be adding here going into next year. Right now, here's the resource. You can find that. And when you click on it, this is what this looks like. So here's the E&M guidebook here. And then when you scroll down, here's our table of contents. Here's some more information about what we've discussed today as far as the committee roles and responsibilities, your term limits, things like that. So there's information there. There's information for developers about how to submit measures. And we talked about all those different steps in our process. So you can read more in depth here if you'd like. Talks a little bit more about appeals, what maintenance endorsement procedures are. And then you get down to these appendices. So Appendix D, this is the measure evaluation rubric. So jumping down here, so it just has some intro information, and it talks a little bit about the maintenance and initial endorsement designations and what those brackets really mean. And then it starts out with the first domain, which is importance, right? So here you can see the sort of things that we're wanting to see with respect to the importance domain, excuse me. So a logic model being submitted that depicts this relationship of either a measured outcome with structures and processes that can be implemented, or a structure and process that will ultimately improve the measured outcome. We want to see this type of information, and then summarizing some of the evidence that supports this linkage, and it starts getting into this business case for the measure. So these are the types of things we are going to be seeing answered or submitted to us from the measure developer to align with what we're expecting to see with this importance domain. And again, you can see for initial endorsement, we're wanting to say if it's implemented, what's the anticipated impact on outcomes, right? If this measure is actually used, what's the impact that we're going to see? And then for maintenance measures, we want to see if there's evidence for a performance gap, right? We want to see that there is some variation that either still exists with this measure. As Brennan mentioned, if the measure starts to become topped out, right, that could be potential grounds for not endorsing it or removing the endorsement of the measure. I mentioned the ratings. So here, what I mentioned is not met, and there's criteria under those ratings. So you can see, you can walk through these criteria and determine after you've read the measure information if the measure is not met. You can decide if the evidence is something other than what is being measured, or if the empirical evidence submitted is without a literature review or grading. Things like this that you can use to help your decision making for whether or not that domain should be not met but addressable, or even met, right? And each one of these domains has that. So if you go to feasibility, these are the aspects of feasibility we'll be looking for within measure submissions, specifically for initial measurement, wanting to know if there's a feasibility assessment that's been conducted and if that led to any changes with the measure. And of course, the criterion ratings under each one of these, or the criteria each one of these ratings help guide you to determining whether or not you feel like this domain has been met, not met but addressable, or met. And you can see there's some supplemental information to help guide you through interpreting some of those terms or what that really means. And then, like I mentioned, scientific acceptability is one of the larger aspects that we have in our domain or our rubric, as well as what's been submitted by a developer. You can see there's quite a lot of things listed here that we are going to be asking of developers to submit and what they're going to be providing to us. I want to at least show you how to find the rubric and how it looks. I now want to actually show you the worksheet itself. So you may be an experienced reviewer of measures. You may actually work for a developer, develop measures yourself, and you may have a very good familiarity of some of these aspects of these domains that are being asked. But if you're not as familiar with this, or this may be your first time going through the process, we've developed this measure evaluation rubric worksheet. This really is intended to help provide more guidance on how to interpret and apply the rubric. So you can definitely go through the criteria under each one of these ratings for each domain and determine whether or not you feel that domain has been met or not. Or you can use this worksheet to help guide you to that as well. So what we have is just an overview here of the table of contents, right? So we have the importance and feasibility. The two scientific acceptabilities are split out for reliability and validity. as well as the equity domain and use and usability domain. And there's some additional overview information, which we've touched on already in the slides about what these ratings mean, what initial maintenance endorsement mean. And in this worksheet, they're designated and color-coded as such, with this purple initial endorsement bracket and maintenance endorsement bracket in blue, and then just sort of guiding about how to really use this worksheet. The worksheet is really set up as these tables. So this is the importance domain. This links straight to where that importance domain is in the rubric. It then provides a description of this domain. So, what this domain is really getting at overall, and if we break that down even further, what are those measure assertions or aspirations that we would expect to see based on this domain? So there's a clear business case for the measure, and you can see that's listed for initial endorsement. There's a relationship between the healthcare structures and our processes and the desired health outcomes. There's also a gap in care that exists, which this measure can identify and also close. And then down here, the patient population included in the measure finds the measure focus meaningful. That measure focus could just be a process. It could be a cost measure. It could also be an outcome measure. It's agnostic to the type of measure. Now, pairing with this aspirations or these measure assertions is also some questions to help guide you to how you think this domain should be rated. So these questions around, do the anticipated impacts of the measure on outcomes justify the need for the measure and its use? So the developer will be submitting information related to the business case. And as you review that information and you look at this question, you can answer it as yes or no. Or if it's a maintenance measure, you can check not applicable. You can also add your notes or comments. You can sort of summarize what it is that made you answer yes or no to this question. And you can capture that in here. Going to the second one, again, there's questions that are aligning with this measure assertion or aspiration for the domain. There's some call outs here to some different types of measures. So for like structure, process, and intermediate outcome measures, there should be some sort of an association between that measure focus, whether it be a structure that they're measuring or a process that they're measuring or intermediate outcome measure that they're measuring, and leading to some sort of beneficial outcome. So some sort of association that the developer has described for a structure, process, and intermediate outcome measure. If it's an outcome or cost measure, we're really trying to get at whether or not that outcome is meaningful, right? And can that outcome be achieved? So this is a little bit different view if it is a outcome measure versus a structure, process, or intermediate outcome. We want to know if really that's a material type of outcome, material type of resource that we're measuring and making sure that we're holding providers accountable. So when you start answering these questions, it's not going to say down here at the bottom of the table, all right, if you have 4 out of 5 yeses, you should rate the measure as met. It doesn't get to that. It really is still going to be you're going back and reviewing how you've answered this worksheet, and then determining whether or not you feel the measure has been met, not met but addressable, or not met. And we kindly ask you to input your rationale as well. And so we want to ensure that this information here is captured. This is the information down here that you'll be putting into the online system when you're doing your independent committee reviews, which I'm going to go to in a little bit. So if you're using this worksheet and you've answered all these questions and you've answered here, you've entered met and you've provided a rationale, or said not met, you provided a rationale, you'll then just copy this information into the online system. If you're using just the online system in the rubric, you can just enter it in there. You don't have to use the worksheet, but this is an additional resource for you if you'd like to use it, especially if this is new to you, or maybe you'd like to see how this this worksheet provides a little bit more information to help you interpret that aspect of the domain. Okay, so how about accessing the measures? How to get there and what to do? So you first need to create an account, and some of you have probably already done this, but for those that haven't, to do so, if you go to the p4qm.org homepage, you'll see over here at the far right, there's a little login option here. If you click that, it'll immediately go to a login page. And if this is your first time and you don't have an account, you will then need to hit sign up now. If you already have an account, Sometimes the system may cache that information, so it may keep that information on your browser and automatically log you in. But if you're able to get to this and you forget your password, you can definitely go through that process to forget your password. But if you don't have an account, you need to sign up. So you do that by first entering your email address that you want all of your emails sent to. Again, this address will be what is going to signal to you that a measure is available for endorsement, or excuse me, for endorsement review. So that independent review that you're going to do. So that email address is what you want to enter in here. You then want to hit send verification code. So if I just did test@test.com, you send verification code, a little box pops up here. Now nothing is coming to this email address because it doesn't really exist, I don't think. But once you get that code in your email, you must enter it in here, because if you skip this and enter all your other information down here and hit create, it's going to tell you it's not going to do it because you haven't entered your verification code. So the first step, put your email in, send the verification code, then put the code in here. You may have to wait maybe a minute, depending on firewalls, et cetera, to get to you if you are on a firewall type of setup. But you then enter that in, you create your password, you have a display name, your phone, your first and last name. You can enter your job title if you wish. You can enter in, obviously, some organization information as well, and then you just create your account. And once you create your account, you then will be able to log in, and you'll go, when you log in, you'll see a dashboard when you go to your profile. This is a little different than what you'll see, again, because I'm logged in myself and I have different permissions, so you won't see all this information up here. What you'll see is more of this table down here, which is sort of your dashboard. So come in January 2nd, you'll get emails letting you know that measures are ready for your review. And like I mentioned, the fall 2023 cycle, you anywhere from 1 to 5 measures within your committee to review that cycle. So when you get that email, you can log into the system. You'll see the measures listed here. And what you'll see here is it's ready for review, right? Or the endorsement cycle status, the CBEID. Now, sometimes it lists a number, or sometimes it lists an actual text. So currently for this cycle, if it lists a number, that is a new measure. If it lists the text, it's a maintenance measure. This will also say this when you actually get into the measure as well, but just letting you know the differences. If you're seeing this listed in this table, as some are numbers, some are text, this is just internally on our end, this is just letting us know that this is a new measure versus a maintenance measure being in text. So if you click on a measure, and let me just go to here, okay. Oops. Let me go back. Sorry, there we go. Go back up here. Okay, so we click on a measure. So say it's ready for a committee independent review. Here you can see some basic information about the measure. So all of the information that the developer submitted is in here, both some simple information, summary information, as well as all the detailed information, as well as attachments. Now, you can see also it says whether it's a new or maintenance measure here. So you don't always have to pay attention to that first table. You can always open up the measure to determine if it's a new or maintenance measure. You can see the cycle, right? You can also see the project it's being submitted to over here. Then you have a measure description, and these are accordion tabs. So here's a full measure specification information, and it's good to, obviously read through this. This is really going to help understand what the measure is, how it's set up, what type of score it is, what type of care setting populations that it's being it's capturing. But you can roll that up as well to sort of save some space on your screen. Some other characteristics of the measure, so like the measure type is down here. It'll list whether it's an outcome or a structure or a process measure. So again, some of those designations in that worksheet that we talked about. You can also see if it's a composite or if it's a ECQM measure, the care settings listed here. You can roll that up. Now we get into importance. And remember, I said it kind of goes in order. The measure information that's listed on the website here goes in order of how we go through the rubric. So all the information will be in order in that way. You can see there's a summary of what the developer has provided as far as the evidence of measure importance. So here's all this information the developer has provided, as well as some citations they've provided, which they've also provided down here. There may be attachments as well. And the attachments I'm going to scroll down. So just excuse me. Well, actually, let me go ahead and roll up. So I'm rolling up all these different sections here just to kind of get down to the measure material. So the measure reference material is at the very bottom or close to the very bottom. So here's all the attachments if a developer has submitted attachments. The developer must submit certain attachments, such as a logic model. Sometimes there's additional attachments as well. There'll be a code table. So the developer, if they have a lot of codes to define their measure, or they have a lot of parameters or covariates or variables in a risk adjustment model that they've included in a data dictionary or some sort of a data table, they'll link that and provide it here. Sometimes developers will indicate that all the codes are available in the text that they've entered into the system, and they won't provide a data dictionary. But just make sure to look to see if there's attachments down here, especially if the developer and the information they've submitted refers to them. So they will refer sometimes to an attachment, and please pay attention to also if they've mentioned that they've included a table in an attached file. So for this cycle, sometimes the developers were adding tables to the logic model submission. So they will reference that in their submission somewhere in their text to please see table 2 or table 3 in the logic model attachment. So that means you will go to the logic model attachment and you would find that table in there if you're interested to see what the results or what the data are within that table. Okay. And then reliability and validity. So this breaks out here. This up here, it says level of testing conducted. For reliability and validity, especially those that may have been used to the NQF process and some testing that can happen there with measures, there's a testing that can happen at the accountable entity level or the measure score level, and testing that can happen at the data element level, or what we call patient and encounter level. That is indicated here. So you can see what type of testing they've done for reliability, and validity does the same thing. So it says right here, right? You can then see that some developers have provided previous measure submission information. That is not required. Sometimes developers provide that to see what changes have been made or what changes have happened from the previous submission to the current submission. It's not required for all measures. So if you do see a previous submission and you don't see that for all of them, that's okay. It's not a required aspect of our submission. Scrolling down, since they did conduct accountable entity testing, this table will appear. This reliability table only appears if accountable entity testing has been selected. This is a table that's generated by the system, and you can see the developer has entered in their reliability testing results into this table, and they've done it by deciles. The developer may also attach additional tables. So you can see right here, table 6 and tables figures attachment. So they provided additional data for consideration. And so you would scroll down or open up the figures attachment and find table 6 if you're wanting to look at more information the developer is describing here. Then validity kind of set up very similar, right? So you've got this developer also provided the previous submission, right? And you can sort of scroll through all the validity information the developer has provided and reading through that. Here's where it says current submission. And this is what we're really looking at, the current submission to rate the measure. Again, the previous submission is something the developer has provided to help maybe show what maybe changes have happened or what types of testing changes have happened from the previous submission. But we are really using the current submission information to provide ratings for the measures. And then I'll scroll down to the risk adjustment here. Risk adjustment, it's really part of validity, but it was really what's a very important aspect. We sort of teased it out to draw attention to it, because risk adjustment in here, you'll also determine whether or not risk adjustment was done. Also, if stratification was done, there'll be indication up here saying that stratification was also provided. And you can also see that what the specifications about how to stratify the measure are done. In this case, the developer only did a statistical risk model. They didn't do any stratification because it doesn't state that here. And then they provide, their risk factors they've explored, as well as a summary of their testing with calibration and discrimination. And they may have additional attachments as well that they've provided, explaining more of their approach to the risk adjustment model. I did mention equity. Let me just scroll down, sorry for all the information here. I did mention equity, and equity is optional, but you see this developer did answer this question. Again, if this is blank, that's okay. It is optional. In the worksheet that we were just showcasing, if you needed a reminder of that, if you went down to equity, it just says it right here. Again, this domain is optional, and because we do recognize that not all measures are designed to improve health equity or advance health equity, but we also are trying to encourage more space and discussion around that with measures. So it's optional. So if it's blank, it's okay. But in this case, the developer did provide some information about some stratification analyses that they did for a social risk variable. Now, lastly, the use and usability section. So you can see that this measure is currently in use in these programs. Down here are the program details based on what the developer has said is being used. And you can roll that up. You can also then see more about how those accountable entities can improve the performance on this measure. And the developers provided a summary there, as well as some other information about the feedback for the measure. So is there ability for those being held accountable to the measure to submit feedback? How's that feedback considered? And here's the progress towards improvement, right? Thinking about how that score is changing over time. And here's that unexpected findings, right? So any unintended consequences that have come from the measure use. And then I mentioned the reference material as well. This measure record, this is obviously communicating when the last time the measure was reviewed. This was back in the surgery committee at the National Quality Forum back in spring of 2020. You can see when it was endorsed, which was September of 2015. And then the next planned maintenance cycle, which is currently cost and efficiency for fall of 2023. Measure is currently endorsed because it's going under evaluation right now. And then determining what happens after the committee's endorsement decision, this information will obviously be refreshed and updated for the next maintenance cycle. You then will see the point of contact as well for this measure. Here's the developer, a developer point of contact and who the steward is within CMS. If you're curious about who the developer and steward are, that information is also listed. Lastly, I mentioned staff assessments will also be available to you. Oh, the attestations. This is something that we asked during the intent to submit period. It is listed here, but it's not going to be used for your independent evaluation. This is just making sure the developer understands that before they submit the full measure, they must have detailed measure specifications, a logic model. They must have information about impact and gap. So it's just an attestation during an intent to submit to make sure that they understand what's expected of full measure submission. I mentioned staff assessments and public comment. So these measures are currently available for public comment right now until January 2nd, right? So any member of the public can come in and find this measure and then leave a comment. The comments will be posted in this section. So if come January 2nd, all the comments received for this measure will be listed at the very bottom of the screen here. Again, this is for you to review and consider within your own decision making. You know, there's a lot of comments from certain stakeholders really promoting the measure, supporting the measure for various different reasons. You can kind of take that into your consideration for your decision making on the measure, as well as bringing this forward during the endorsement meetings, because we will be summarizing the public comments. We will be trying to bring attention to any concerns from public comments for the committee's discussion and consideration, but all of this will be made available to you during your independent reviews and prior to the endorsement meeting. I mentioned the staff preliminary assessments. So this is what this looks like here. So we will write out our assessment for each one of those domains. And so you can see for importance here, we have met, not met, and not met but addressable. So we will then enter in our summary of the strengths and weaknesses of the measure based on that domain. And it's really just using that PQM rubric. When you do your committee independent reviews, this is a very similar setup. So when you log in to do your reviews, you'll have a committee independent review section, which is here. And once that's open and available, it'll look exactly like this. And you'll have the importance, and then you can determine whether or not the importance has been met, not met addressable, and then leave your rationale here. So again, like I mentioned, if you're using that worksheet, it's this section right here that you'll be carrying over to the online form if you're using the worksheet. I mean, you're more than welcome to do it without, excuse me, without using the worksheet, but it's here as a resource. I also will mention that all of these staff assessments will be made publicly available. So we kindly ask that you, whenever you're writing up some things or concerns, to try to keep in mind to be professional, be respectful as well. This will all be made publicly available. Our consensus-based work is all transparent. And so we post obviously all the public comments, we post our staff assessments for public consumption, and it's also helpful for the developers to see what committee concerns are prior to the endorsement meeting. So come January 22nd, right after that, all of the staff assessments as well as the committee independent reviews will be available for public consumption in advance of the meetings that happen starting on January 29th. So all of these are here. There's also a summary here. If there's any final summary you'd like to add, you can definitely do so in your committee independent reviews. It's not required, but we do ask that you answer all of these 5 domains here. And then you would just hit save once you are done entering in your information. If you don't hit save, it will not save. You'll have to come back and enter it in again. So whatever you do, make sure to save what you've done so you don't lose it. Okay, so we walked through a lot of that. Again, try to show you where some of those resources are. Also try to show you how to potentially use the worksheet as a supplemental resource, and then how you would then apply that to the measure with all that information into the system. And you must have an account in order to do those committee independent reviews. Okay, so if we can go back to the slides. Can I wrap this up so we can have some Q&A? Thank you. We go to the next slide. All right. So we're going to go into some Q&A, but I just wanted to also, again, thank everyone for being on the call today and hanging on through a lot of this information. Again, I mentioned it again. It's a lot of information. This recording will be available to you to go back to. The Battelle staff are also here and available to you if you have questions about how to do something or you can't remember how to access something. Please reach out to pqmsupport@battelle.org. That's what we're here for, to help provide guidance for you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And like I mentioned, as we get into the endorsement meetings, we definitely will be there to help provide guidance on the process about what we're supposed to do next and how we flow through that. And we also will have, during those endorsement meetings, have a portion of the meeting dedicated to going through the proceedings of the meeting itself. So again, how the measures are presented, how the developer has opportunities to discuss and answer questions, how the committee then discusses, things like that. We will go through that aspect of the proceedings during the endorsement meetings at the very beginning of the day. I think we can go to the next slide. And I think we're ready for some questions and answers. So I guess, Brenna, I'll open it up to see what we got.
We got quite a few, so thank you everyone for your engagement. I know we shared a ton of information. We got a lot of different questions and a lot of very related questions. So I'm going to try to kind of go through thematically from as they've been coming in, just so that we can, have a little bit of robust back and forth as needed on certain topics, just to try to cover as efficiently as we can so that we get a lot out there. So we did get quite a few questions related to DOI, Matt. So one person asked, when we submit our DOI for measures, they see that like now where to place on the form, but if the organization is working on performance to improve those measures, does that mean that they have interest because they are working to improve their own measure performance? So I think just trying to understand for measures that are already in use, whether there's a disclosure that needs to be made there if your organization is involved in using those measures.
Yeah, no, it's really thinking about whether or not you have any role in development of the measure, or you've worked for the developer in any way. If you're assisting with testing a measure, or even just looking at a measure that you had no involvement in, but trying to just capture data for seeing improvement on performance, that is not a significant conflict. You're more than welcome to disclose that, but it's not a conflict that would lead you to be recused from any voting. We're really looking to see if you are an employee of the developer, if you're a consultant of the developer, or a consultant for that measure, or participated on a TEP. Those are the types of conflicts we're trying to identify to potentially determine whether or not recusal is needed for voting. Again, unlike the NQF process or the National Quality Forum process, a recusal for our new process means you're recused from voting only. So if you have participated in a TEP and you are on a committee, you can discuss the measure, you can share perspectives from that TEP as you participated in it, you just will not be voting.
Thanks, Matt. There's another sort of follow-up from a different committee member that I wanted to touch on. I'm going to give my thoughts first, and then I'll turn it to you, Matt, if there's anything you'd add to it. So, one committee member expressed a little bit of concern over that policy. So trying to understand sort of the relative fairness of having somebody with a known conflict participating in the discussion, whether or not that gives a competitive advantage to measures that sort of have someone with a conflict participating in the discussion versus those that don't. And so I think what I want to kind of convey here is that there are a range of different conflicts and disclosures that we are tracking to. And while I completely hear that point, and I think it's a great question and very worthwhile to bring up, but I would say there are sort of two things that we're trying to do with these disclosures. The biggest one is making sure that we understand what those conflicts are, right? That's why we have people disclose them, to understand, so that when that person makes a comment, it's always taken with the perspective that, okay, this person has, maybe a financial interest in this measure being successful. So it doesn't mean that what they're saying isn't true, but it's definitely important to know where that person's perspective lies. A very specific example of why we changed this policy and are allowing people that would be recused from voting to participate in the discussion came from a lesson learned over this past cycle, where one of the committee co-chairs with very, very deep subject matter expertise related to a specific measure concept had to be recused from the discussion because he had participated in the technical expert panel for that measure when it was being developed. Now, this person had no financial interest in the outcome of this endorsement decision. He was selected to be on that TEP because he is a person with very specific personal experience and expertise related to that topic. That's incidentally the same reason he was selected to serve on one of our committees. And it was a real detriment to the discussion that he wasn't able to participate because he was the only person in the room that had direct patient experience with the condition that was being discussed. And so by allowing people that have some of those known conflicts to participate, we're not trying to give any measure a competitive advantage. We're just trying to ensure that anybody who has an important perspective and that was put on these E&M committees for that perspective are able to be leveraged appropriately and with the right guardrails in place. But the way we're mitigating that is by, having them recused from the actual voting. But Matt, anything you would add to that?
No, I think that's spot on there. I think the expertise, the reason why individuals are seated on a TEP is because they have expertise within that clinical condition or that the methods used for a measure or what have you. So having that expertise also sitting on an endorsement committee, it could be helpful for the committee to consider some of the perspectives, maybe of that TEP or even of that member, because of the expertise that they also provided on that TEP. Again, the rest of the committee, both the recommendations group and advisory group, are able to decide on their own based on that TEP member's perspectives or opinions, can take that into consideration and still determine whether or not they agree or disagree with whatever they had mentioned. That member just is recused from voting. So even though that they're discussing, they're just recused from voting. So they're not actually weighing in on the endorsement decision of the measure. It's just they're be able to discuss and contribute because they have expertise in the area, whether it be lived experience and expertise there, or themselves of a methodologist or clinician, et cetera.
Thanks, Matt. One more DOI question for you. This one's pretty specific to the conflict of interest form in box 2A. It suggests that if a committee member has ever worked as a consultant for the measure developer or steward that's listed, that they need to disclose that. And so the question for that is, does that mean any contract, even if unrelated to those measures? So if they've ever consulted for one of those entities, even if not related to the measure that's being brought up for review, is that what would result in checking this box, or is it only if you've done work specific to the measures under review?
Yeah, it would be both. If you're questioning whether or not something it may be a conflict, it's good to disclose it. Really, a disclosure doesn't mean you're going to be recused or you have a significant conflict, but disclosing it is, again, in the spirit of transparency. That gives us more information as well to determine whether or not you should be recused. So if you're questioning whether or not something is a potential conflict, it's good to disclose it. And again, we are reviewing that internally, and we will reach out with additional questions if needed. But ultimately, yeah, it's good to disclose it. So it would be, I would go on both in that scenario, in that case.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, I'm going to switch categories now. There have been a bunch of different questions about quorum and how that's calculated, so I'll try to smush a few of those together. I can take this kind of first one, Matt, just to give you a break since you've been talking for a while. So somebody asks whether the quorum is derived from both the advisory and recommendation groups as the denominator. So it's a little bit, there's two parts, right? So there's the discussion quorum, which is that we need 60% of the recommendation group members to be present during roll call at the beginning of the meeting in order for us to even hold the discussion that day. So that denominator is just recommendation group members. That's 60% of recommendation group members for that quorum. Voting quorum, so after the meeting is held and we're actually looking for votes on the measures, is 80% of all active measures, and that's combined between recommendation group and advisory group. So in that case, yes, the quorum is derived from both groups as the denominator. Okay, let me go to this next quorum question. Matt, I'll let you take this one. So quorum is just, I confirm a yes or no here. Quorum is only required at roll call at the beginning of the day, or are you retaking roll for each measure discussion?
Yeah, so we will be taking it at the beginning of the day during roll call. So again, stressing the importance of making yourself available for those meetings for the entirety of the meeting as much as possible. Because we do take it at the beginning, and we will be monitoring attendance, and we will be kindly asking people to please let us know if for some reason you had to step away or what have you, so we can really continue to monitor quorum. If for some reason we see that attendance does drop, we may have to pause and do another round to make sure that we still have discussion quorum or voting quorum. And if we lose voting quorum, obviously we will not be able to proceed with voting. We have to discuss and then send an offline survey and recording to collect offline votes. But we will be monitoring attendance, and so we will continue to try to retake roll call or reassess quorum if we feel that the numbers have dropped below those thresholds. But we will definitely do that at the very beginning of the call. And if we have a substantial break and we know that there's a lot of people kind of coming and going, which we hope isn't going to be the case, we may have to do another round of quorum assessment just to make sure that we maintained it.
Thanks, Matt. And that ties into this next and final question related to quorum. So I think this person and maybe others need a little clarification on what a recusal looks like and how it's actually operationalized. They were asking whether recused members need to join so that the committee can reach quorum, and if you're recused, would you not be eligible to be on the recommendations group? I will say,
great.
Yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, please go for it.
I was going to say, great question. Yes, so a recused member is still an active member. So there's these different statuses that you also see in the guidebook. There's active status and inactive. You've heard, quorum is based on active members. you may go inactive, meaning that you are not participating for that cycle. You're not off the committee. You're still would continue your term lengths, but maybe something happened in your personal life or work life that you just cannot participate that cycle. You will be moved to an inactive status, and you should let us know, as soon as the cycle kicks off, right? That you just won't be participating, and you move to inactive. That means you don't have to join the meetings. And you won't be discussing and voting. You are an inactive member. But recusals, you are still an active member. You just may be recused from one or more measures, and you're only being recused from voting. So you're only recused from voting. So you still can discuss and review the measures and submit your comments on the measures, especially if you're an advisory group member, but you just wouldn't be contributing to the voting. So we do encourage that if you are recused to please still attend, because we still want you to listen to the conversations, or if you're on the recommendations group, to actually participate in those discussions, but you won't be voting. Now, how is that presented? We will identify those recusals early on. So that's why we are asking you to, once you get that MSDOI form or that measure disclosure of interest form, once you receive that, please send it back as soon as possible. Again, it takes like 5 minutes to complete. Then we get giving you a deadline of the 22nd of December. So we will know that early on. And as we start off the endorsement meetings and do roll call, we will identify those disclosures, and if those disclosures or conflicts resulted in any recusal of the measure. So we will do that during the roll call, so it's on record publicly.
Matt. All right, switching gears here. We got 2 questions right in a row about the terminology around business case. So I can take a first pop at this one, and then Matt, jump in if you want to add. But so if one person asked sort of why we used the specific term business case, and then another person just asked for a little bit more information about what a business case actually means. And so I'll just say that comes from the blueprint. So that comes from the CMS Measures Management System blueprint. A business case is a document that basically supports the importance measure evaluation criterion. So, and the idea is that it basically creates a model that helps to predict the measure performance and the impact it's likely to have on health and financial outcomes. So it's not specific to any one kind of measure. It's not like the business case only applies to cost measures or anything like that. It's just it's a term that's used very frequently among developers who are developing measures on behalf of CMS in particular. It's part of their sort of standard process. And so basically what we are looking for in these submissions is some evidence from the literature and any preliminary data analysis that basically shows that the measure developer or steward has sort of modeled out in some kind of, structured way how measure performance is likely to impact the healthcare system and financial and health outcomes. Anything that you'd add there, Matt?
I think that was great. Yeah, I'll just add, it's getting at, does this measure the existence of the measure, and if it's going to be used, will it lead to an outcome? And the developer should describe all of that, and they should describe the types of outcomes that would be improved, or if the measure is already an outcome, what types of processes and structures can be implemented to improve that. So it's really providing those linkages, and the evidence support that, like Brennan mentioned, could be literature, internal analyses, empirical analyses, but we're looking to see that type of information. And it could be a cost measure, outcome, structure, process. There still should be that type of business case or design that's being presented to us and also to you, showing that the existence and use of this measure will lead to beneficial outcomes.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, switching gears again, we received a lot of questions related to both what the actual measure submission materials include, what the endorsement and maintenance committee members will actually get to look at, and then when. So just to sort of start off, just to reiterate kind of what we covered a little bit earlier in the presentation, the measure submission materials are derived completely from information that measure developers have submitted for the measures that are being reviewed. So that includes any testing information based on any testing and analysis that they themselves conducted. They may cite the literature for any studies or guidelines that support the importance or scientific acceptability of the measure. And usually it'll also include some qualitative information from experts weighing in on the measure concept that supports things like usability and feasibility. So for the person that was asking kind of what primary sources are cited, those are them. So it's all information derived from the actual measure developer or steward that they've collected or generated for the measure. In terms of, go ahead.
Sorry, Brenna. No, I'll let you finish. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in terms of when that information is going to find its way to you, like we covered earlier, it's basically going to be once the public comment period is over, all of the committee members will receive the public comment summary, our staff's preliminary evaluations, and all of the measure submission materials to review at the same time using the rubric that we'll provide to do your evaluations. And I think we give you about 3 weeks to do those evaluations. And if you wanted to look at any information sooner, the measures are available for public comment right now. So you could always look at what's been posted publicly on the website about the measures to get a head start. But Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to dropping this link into the chat, and because I sort of quickly showcase this, but if you go to where the public announcement is on our homepage, which is that link that we just dropped into the chat, you'll see the list of projects, and clicking on those will take you to a measure table at the bottom of the project page. Measure, I'll just sort of screen share this a little bit just quickly, just so everyone can kind of follow along here. So here's a homepage. Here's this public comment is now open for measures of consideration. Here's a public comment is open for fall 2023 measures. Clicking on that brings you to the links to the 5 project pages. Those links really go to this tab here where individual projects and project pages can be found. So let's go to the primary, actually let's go to cost and efficiency. Here's just an explanation of the project. And down here, here's the measures table, right? And you can filter according to the cycle, the submission type. But right now it automatically goes to fall 2023 since that's the most recent cycle. Here are the measures listed for fall 2023 evaluation. These are open for public comment right now. The measure that I was showcasing earlier was this one right here. So if I clicked on it, here's all that information that we just walked through. All of this is available right now to anyone to review and make comments on. They can roll everything up, right? This is all the developer submission information. And at the very bottom, I'm sorry for your eyes here, I probably just did an accordion thing. Again, here's the links to those other types of materials that the developer has provided as far as data tables, other types of testing tables, logic models, all listed here. And then if you wanted to leave a comment, or if you are an interested party who wants to leave a comment, you can do so down here. And again, those comments will be made available once they are posted and made available on this page. So you can find all that information now. And you don't have to wait necessarily for when the January 2nd, the committee independent review. On January 2nd, what will happen is that you will have access to actually leave your review in the system, right? As we showed you earlier how to do that. Again, that will also get posted to this measure page as a full sort of measure information summary that's available to developers and anyone of the public. So you can find it now, and you don't have to wait to January 2nd to start reviewing measures. You can start doing so now and save a little time if you'd like, but just wanted to draw attention to where you can find that, how you can find it. If you're on a project committee, you just go to find your project. So like say you want to go to cost and efficiency, you can just go to project. And then again, you can just go down and make sure it's on fall 2023. You can apply, and there's the measures. And then you can just view them all and view all the specifications and attachments. And you don't have to wait till January 2nd. It's just January 2nd will be when you can start entering in your assessment into the system.
Yeah, and actually that's a really nice segue, Matt, because another person asked if there's an average number of measures that folks can expect to review. And I was going to say there's no average because it changes every cycle depending on how many are submitted into what committee. But if you want to head start on seeing how many measures you're going to have to review, you can see the ones that have been posted to your project on the public comment website and get a sense for which ones are going to be on your plate. Okay, let's see. One person is just looking for a little bit of clarity, and I'm sure if one person's wondering, then a lot of people are wondering. Can you just clarify whether only the advisory committee members who participate in the real-time endorsement meeting actually get to vote on the final meeting vote? So I think maybe less specifically, Matt, can you just reiterate who is allowed to vote and what the requirements are for them to be able to vote on the measures?
Yeah, sure. So both advisory group members and recommendation group members vote during these endorsement meetings. The advisory group is really there to listen to the recommendations group discussions. And during those discussions, what we will be doing with our co-chairs as well is making sure that that advisory group input, which is largely from the independent reviews that you'll do before the meeting, is being brought forward. So we will do some prep work internally to identify some of the key areas. If we see a lot of the same issue pop up in those independent reviews, we want to make sure to present that and make sure the recommendations group also discusses it. That comes from recommendation groups members, but also comes from the advisor group and their independent reviews that we also are collecting prior to the meeting. So the advisor group is there to listen to how those concerns and discussions are presented and discussed by the recommendations group, as well as the developer, their responses to those concerns, which will happen during the meeting. And ultimately, the voting will happen on that measure, which again, the entire group, the entirety of that committee votes, both the recommendation group and the advisory group. If you are on the advisory group now, by the end of your term, you will then be on the recommendations group. So you may have seen this in your email communications, how this sort of is staggered and how committee members roll off. Recommendations group members will roll off because that will technically be their last term. So if you're on the recommendations group, you probably received the email to say that you are only there for 1 year. You're only serving as 1 year. After you term off, the individuals that from the advisor group that had a 2-year term at the very beginning for this cycle, that 1 year will be gone for them, and their last year will then be on the recommendations group. And then the new wave of committee members will then start at a 3-year term, and they'll start out on the advisory group. And then by the end of their term, they'll come into the recommendations group. So even if you're on the advisory group, you will have an opportunity to be on the recommendations group. But again, the advisory group is important just to make sure we haven't missed anything, right? The committees are structured to be a lot larger to ensure that we have more of the voice and more of the perspectives being heard. And the advisory group members are the larger of the two, right? The recommendations group is more of a smaller subset. And the advisor group is also there to make sure that we're not losing anything from that larger voice, right? And so we want to make sure to bring that forward. But you still have that opportunity through your term to serve on the recommendations group before it's over.
Matt, we ended up receiving like almost 60 questions. There's a ton on here that we didn't get to yet. Some I think we sort of addressed via other questions, but there are a few really important ones that we need to follow up on. So I think Matt will either follow up via email or with like an FAQ or something like that. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we will. Yeah, we'll make sure to follow up with answering these questions we've received. A lot of really great questions, and really appreciate a lot of that engagement. So we will definitely follow up with responses to these questions, and so that we make sure that people are sort of clear before going into January.
Perfect. Okay, well then in that case, I'm just going to turn to you, Matt, to close us out here.
All right, thanks. So a couple minutes left. Just wanted to say thank you again for attending this meeting, but also thank you for just being involved in this work. This is the first cycle of the new process, so we're very much looking forward to learning through this. And also there'll be opportunities at the end of our cycle where we want to collect your feedback. How can we improve this? Especially, the system that you're using to enter in your information, or some of the additional resources that may be needed. We definitely will want to capture that feedback after we get through this first cycle. But this is exciting. We're very much looking forward to this and looking forward to working with you. It's great to see all these experts and those members with various different expertise and experiences being a part of this. A lot of new faces and a lot of familiar ones as well. So it's great to see everyone being involved. So but thank you again. I believe this might have been the last slide. If you could click to the next one, just to make sure. I think that might be it. Yeah, it's probably over. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's it. So we'll let you go. It's about 3:59 p.m. Thank you all once again. If you have any questions, pqmsupport@patel.org. And also make sure to share information about this meeting around. And like I said, the recording will be posted a week from today. But thank you all. Have a great remainder of your day. Take care.
Well,